I just want to welcome everybody to this first of our three legislative updates for 2024. We will be asking all of you to please mute your audio, and we will then be asking you to unmute when you have a question to ask. Please remember that this is sponsored. We want to thank our sponsors, the League of Women Voters for Bloomington, Monroe County, the League of Women Voters for Brown County, the League of Women Voters for Johnson County, and the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. We now will kind of get into the ground rules. This is an informative session, not a debate. So we are just asking individuals to comment on your legislative questions, not to debate the merits. We have invited all of the legislators from districts, representative districts 46, 47, 57, 58, 60, 61, and 62, and all of the state senators from districts 32, 36, 37, 40, 41, and 44. Those accepting the invitation and with us today are Representative Matt Pierce and Senator Shelley Yoder, who will be taking questions from you. There you can see on the screen all of the names of the individuals who were invited and the representation of where their districts are. Okay, please be civil and respectful in asking your questions. Each legislator will have up to 10 minutes to give an opening statement. Then there will be 2 minutes for a response. The order of who answers will rotate. We will start alphabetically with Matt Pierce. After the legislator remarks, participants may ask a question. And the process for doing that is that you go into the chat and there will be a recipient named Question Moderator 1. And you direct your comments and just tell Question Moderator, I have a question to ask. And you will be called upon in the order that your request to ask a question is received. Please limit your questions to 1 minute in length. So please try to make them get to the point and be concise. Each legislator will be given the opportunity to respond to every question. The Community Access Television Services is recording this session, so please be aware of that. I believe at this particular point in time, we are ready to get started with Matt Pierce and his opening statement. Matt, you may take over.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I thought I would start by just talking about the schedule. So this is a short session, and by law, we have to be done by March 14th. But the leaders of both House and the Senate have vowed this is going to be a short session. I don't know if that just means maybe finishing around the 7th instead of closer to the 14th, or whether they really somehow put the pedal to the metal. But I think it's probably going to end around the 7th, if I had to guess. So this coming Tuesday in the House is the deadline for any bill in committee to get heard and voted out of committee. So if you wake up Wednesday morning and your House bill has not been voted out of committee with the committee report adopted, it is dead for the session and it's kind of game over. The deadline then for all the bills to get through the second reading or amendment phase is that Thursday, so this coming Thursday. And then the deadline for all bills to be passed out of the House in order to survive is Monday, so a week from Monday. And that means that if for some reason a bill doesn't get called down by that deadline, that bill will also be dead for the session. And this occasionally happens. Sometimes members move bills and they get really bogged down and opposition starts to build to them or something intervenes. And so they just kind of keep passing. Each member has the control of when to call their bill down for a vote after it gets placed on the calendar. So sometimes a member will just keep passing and kind of give up on a bill. So occasionally we have one or two bills just kind of sitting there that end up dying because they just don't move. So that's the first half. And the thing that's kind of unique about the fast pace of the short session, a little faster than normal, is really we've only had about 2 weeks and maybe a few days to actually get bills out of committee. So you're talking about 2 committee hearings. You can handle maybe 4 or 5 bills a committee in a rational way. You can cram more in if you want, but to really do any kind of justice to the topics of the bills, you really got to stick to about 4 or 5 bills a hearing. So there's not much that each committees can do unless they're really pushing the envelope. And it'll be the same thing when the bills come over to the House and the Senate. Is our schedule, I think, is about a 2-week window in which to have those bills actually heard and out of committee. And the other thing I should mention too is it's by tradition when we get, it's kind of like a halftime thing. It's like people going to the locker room. It's kind of funny. But after we get past third reading a week from Monday, we'll have a short kind of pro forma session on Tuesday. Maybe some bill lists will get handed down. But then the legislature goes into recess for the rest of the week. So there's kind of like a Wednesday through Sunday halftime break. And then legislators will come back that following Monday and start scheduling Senate bills in the House. And I guess the House will be doing the same, or the Senate will be doing the same thing with the House. So that's kind of the schedule for how things are playing out. So at the beginning of the session, or before the session, and the ramp up to the session, the leaders of the House and the Senate said this was not going to be a controversial session, that it was a short session. They weren't going to handle a lot of heavy kind of things, and that they would be more focused on fine-tuning things they had done. And they identified third grade reading deficiencies as an important issue, and student truancy in schools is another issue that should be addressed, and tweaking their apprenticeship bill. And that was pretty much it. But I think that the memo didn't get down to some of the committee chairs and people introducing bills. And so some bills I want to highlight just quickly that I think will get the most attention in the session is the House Bill 1108, which was represented by, or introduced by Representative Hall, who represents areas of Monroe County. That bill would preempt the county's steep slopes ordinance outside of the Lake Monroe watershed. So the bill does carve out an exception and allow the county to still regulate steep slopes below 25% within the Lake Monroe watershed. But anything outside of the watershed, the county would not be able to have rules about slopes that are lower than a 25% slope. So we had a good debate about that on the House floor. I pointed out that, you know, the county's looked into this. They've decided what makes most sense for our topography, for our situation. And once again, we have the legislature attempting to preempt decisions made by local communities. But that bill did pass the House, and now it'll be over in the Senate. I've heard that it's going to get a hearing over there. So I suspect that bill is going to pass in some form and limit the regulation of steep slopes. But thankfully, Representative Hall did carve out the watershed, so that's good. But, you know, every other watershed in the state that might need some protection does not get that favorable treatment. The other House Bill 1399 deals with chemicals called PFAS. They're known as forever chemicals because they don't break down in the environment. They've been found to be in a lot of people's blood systems already, and they are linked to causing cancer and other things. And they've been put into fire retardants and all kinds of plastics and things. And so the pharmaceutical industry and the manufacturers, the medical device industry showed up, and they asked for what I think is kind of a strange bill. The state of Indiana does not have any laws regulating PFAS. I think we told fire departments they have to tell firefighters that PFAS is in the gear they use since it's a fire retardant. There might have been some restrictions on using foam that's used to fight things like airplane fires because PFAS is in there. And that's really bad because that gets into the water when those chemicals get sprayed around. But we really don't have any comprehensive regulation at all. So this is kind of carving out from regulation before regulation exists, which is kind of strange. Certain types of PFAS chemicals. And so the industry people are trying to claim that you have water-soluble PFAS, which is bad, and then you have non-soluble PFAS, which is okay, because they claim it won't dissolve into the water system. But of course, all that stuff breaks down into smaller parts and kind of ends up around. And there was testimony from both an IU and a South Bend expert that, you know, there's a scientific definition of PFAS and scientists understand the dangers. And so the legislature kind of making up its own definition to satisfy industry doesn't really make sense. So that's a bill to watch. The further assault on wetlands with House Bill 1383. So that would, you know, we have very weak protections for wetlands right now. The Supreme Court, you might remember, ruled that U.S. Supreme Court that the waters of the United States definition, which gives the federal government through the Corps of Engineers the ability to protect wetlands that are connected or related to the waters of the United States, that got really narrowed in by the Supreme Court. So now there's this gap in protection of wetlands. And if the state doesn't step up and fill that in, there's just not going to be protections there. And they're actually going the other way and kind of redefining, you know, what is a wetland worthy of protection. And so there's been some discussion around that. House Bill 1093 deals with child labor. It would allow 16-year-olds to work in dangerous agricultural jobs, and would also allow students to work later, longer hours. And that's also gotten some discussion. The proponents of the bill claim they're just making our laws closer to the federal laws and accommodating Amish people who apparently their kids only go to school through the 8th grade, and then under their religion, they're done. So they claim this would let the Amish kids work the way they are. So that's a child labor bill. House Bill 1412 would preempt an ordinance that there are many of them around the state, including here in Bloomington, that prohibit dogs and cats from being sold in pet stores. The idea was to try to cut off this kind of puppy mill market. And because the state didn't act, the local units decided the best way you could do that is just kind of try to take this profit out of dogs and cats. What this bill would do is it preempts any local ordinance that prohibits the sale of those animals in a pet store. And then it creates a regulatory system where the Board of Animal Health is supposed to be investigating or inspecting people who register as animal breeders. The problem is there's no money appropriated for them to actually do that job. It just says, well, whatever fines you collect from people and money that happens to get into this fund, you can use that. And the Board of Animal Health gets to decide when they have enough money to actually do inspections. So I think we're going to end up with a law that really has no teeth in it. And that's a little bit problematic because we've had horrible problems with puppy mills and other animal abuse around the state. And then finally, the last bill, which I think kind of gives you the flavor of this session, is House Bill 1235, would prohibit an ongoing lawsuit between the city of Gary and firearm manufacturers. So Gary is one of the maybe only city left in America that hasn't had its lawsuit against gun manufacturers under the theory, kind of like what we saw with opioids and Purdue Pharma and some others, that basically they knew their guns were being sold illegally and being used for crimes, and yet they kept pumping the weapons into Gary. That's basically what that lawsuit's about. If this bill passes, it will basically tell Gary, you've got to withdraw that lawsuit, which has been going on for, I think, like 20 years. It's insane. And they finally just got to the discovery point where they can begin to ask the firearms manufacturers for records and data to see exactly what had been happening with their policies on selling of weapons. So those are just some examples of the bills we've been seeing in the House of Representatives.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Thank you very much for all of those comments. And Senator Yoder, we are now ready to take your opening statements.
Thank you so much, Sonia. It's great to be here. Thank you for putting on this event. And it is really exciting to see how our audience has expanded. My goodness, I was just really appreciating the number of people on this call. So thank you for carving out time on this Saturday morning and for inviting Representative Pierce and myself here. It's really wonderful to be able to come here, give you an update. Representative Pierce is a master at giving sort of this really amazing macro level look at where we are in session. So I won't review that, but thank you for that, Matt, and give you a little update on what's going on in the Senate. So I serve on health and provider services, on education, on the education committee. I'm ranking minority member on environment. I'm new to appropriations this session, as well as the school funding formula committee, and I serve on the rules committee. We have not met all session. I mean, it's only been we're about to enter our third week, but we have not had any environment meetings. Our first meeting was, I was told at the beginning of session as ranking minority member that we would have our first meeting coming up this coming week. And we just got a notice on Thursday that meeting has been moved from Monday to Wednesday. And when, as an individual who, I'm on a lot of committees, and when they set forth the calendar of when every committee is going to be meeting, and the Environment Committee meets on Monday morning, and then the Thursday before our meeting, it's changed to Wednesday, which I have two committees already. So that's frustrating as a member of that committee, when we're only going to have one meeting for the whole session, and they move the day and the time to the middle of another, where other meetings or committee meetings are occurring. So it's frustrating. But one of the things that we're facing in environment is we will be hearing the bill that's coming over from the House, which is 1383, which is more deregulation of the wetlands bill. And we will be hearing that in environment on Wednesday. So I know that the League of Women Voters cares about issues of the environment, specifically protecting wetlands. And so I wanted to give you a heads up that meeting will occur on Wednesday morning at 10:30 versus the slated, the typical time that environment meets and was given on Monday mornings. It will be on Wednesday morning. So we will be hearing that bill. And I hope that many of you look at that bill. It's 1383. Further deregulation of wetlands. Some of the priorities of the Senate that we were told would be addressing reading deficiencies, and Senate Bill 1 is a retention bill that would require retention for third graders who fail the I-read test in the third grade. They would be required to be held back. Senate Bill 1, it does bring to light some of the serious issues that the state of Indiana has when it comes to third graders being able to read. The failing rates of the I-read has increased, but I think what is important to note is we don't know why. And our, the Department of Education has now testified in both the Education Committee, which I heard 2 weeks ago, and in appropriations this week. And consistently, they say, this is a problem we can solve. But the real challenge is when you ask them, well, what is contributing to it? That part is unknown. And what we have heard in both committee meetings is we know that not being able to read has a serious impact on an individual's life. We also know that holding a student back also is considered on par on the adverse childhood experiences, according to the American Association of Pediatrics, to have as devastating health impacts on a child. So without a plan on how we're going to address the impact on holding so many students back in the third grade, I think it is concerning that we would make it required to hold students back without any plan on how we're going to address the impact of retention on our young people. Yes, we need to address the reading rates, the reading proficiency of our young people, but just retaining them and not having a plan, I worry and have serious concerns about moving forward with Senate Bill 1 without a plan. We still have required school attendance or attending school at the age of 7 and not 5 years of age in the state of Indiana. We do not have universal pre-K in the state of Indiana. And by the time a young person gets to the third grade, reading proficiency has already been established. So I will say that Senate Bill 1 does address this in that the bill will require more testing earlier on to make sure that that child is on track for passing iRead, but that is introducing more standardized tests for our young people. So I have concerns about Senate Bill 1. It will be on second reading this week on the floor, so would love to hear from folks. I know that people care about young people being able to read. That we care about, but I think that we also need to address alongside that added resources for students and for families who are going to be mandated to retain those students. So that is Senate Bill 1. Senate Bill 2 is a child care bill, and it is working to address the child care deserts that we have throughout Indiana. And what I appreciated about Senate Bill 2 is I was able to work with Senator Charbonneau, who's carrying that bill, and really address what we heard throughout the year last year. And this is an issue of not having a child care workforce. And so the bill actually will expand what are known as child care vouchers for child care workers, to make sure that if a child care worker has a child, they have greater access to these vouchers. And we still need to address how we're paying child care workers. That's a major issue in wages, and the lack of high wages. So basically what I like to say is not putting our money where our mouth is, not paying childcare workers what we need to pay them in order to keep them in the workforce. But Senate Bill 2 does attempt to address that. And so I'm looking forward to hearing Senate Bill 2 on the floor this week and getting it over to the House for more debate and making that bill even better. So Matt Pierce, it's on its way to you soon, hopefully this week. Senate Bill 3 was also a priority, and it is a bill that is addressing prior authorization in healthcare, and that bill is a priority of the Republicans, and we heard that bill the first week in the healthcare committee, and the author of that bill said, who is a physician, it's Senator Johnson. He said, we need to address the way that insurance companies are impeding the progress that people can receive care, or whether or not an individual can receive care. And prior authorization needs to end because no one should be interfering with a patient and a doctor. That those are healthcare decisions that are sacred and should be left to the patient and the doctor. And I would agree. And I made that point in committee I said, I just need you to say that again. And he said it again. And then I made the point that what we did with passing the near total ban on abortion was not putting insurance companies there, but saying politicians should be in that conversation between a physician and a patient. And we've not seen that bill since. That bill has not gotten to appropriations. It has not been scheduled for second reading. So I'm not sure actually where that bill is, but that was a priority, and haven't heard much about that bill since. So not sure about Senate Bill 3. Senate Bill 5 is also a priority, and it will enable municipalities and schools to access money for lead pipe remediation, and it's a good bill. I'm actually on Senate Bill 2, Senate Bill 3, and Senate Bill 5. So I'm excited that we've had some good debate and conversations on the floor that actually are beneficial for Hoosiers. Some of the bills that I filed this year. So it was a repeal of Senate Bill 1, I call it the total ban on access to abortion care. I filed a repeal of that bill. Since then, we've been having conversations about our labor and delivery units closing across Indiana, the inability of attracting providers to practice in Indiana, and the access to care in Indiana. We've had that conversation for the last 18 months of how we're going to address this because it's been worsened. And we've been talking about the increasing costs of healthcare, the demands of the underestimation of $1 billion on Medicaid expenses. And I think repealing the total ban on abortion care could address some of these real concerns that we are facing in the state of Indiana. I filed that bill, and one of the requirements for a Democrat to get their bill heard is to have a Republican co-author. So, filing something like the repeal of Senate Bill 1 is going to be a challenge. But I got one. Senator Vanita Becker has joined me on that bill, and the two of us are making clear that Indiana knows we are not done fighting for this. We are going to work to repeal this. The state of Indiana has a very high bar, almost an impossible ability to put a question on a ballot. So this is the only way we can do this. And Senator Becker and I know that the majority of Hoosiers want what Dr. Johnson said, and that is to be able to have conversations, sacred conversations with our healthcare provider, and keep those private, and to be able to access healthcare that we need when we need it. And so I'm honored to be joined with that. So I would appreciate any help in encouraging the state of Indiana to hear that bill in these final days, but it's definitely teed up to have a hearing. The other bill that we have been working on for the last several years is a repeal of the sales tax on menstrual collection discharge devices. And for the first time in Indiana, we heard that issue and the real need to do that on the floor of, we heard it in a task force, but it was step one. We have not been able to even sort of shine the light of day on this issue. And we were able to talk about repealing the tax on menstrual products in Senator Holdman's tax reform task force. And it was powerful. And we're still working on that, and would appreciate your help in moving that legislation forward. Some of the more controversial bills that have people very concerned. One of the bills that we're hearing in education is permitting schools to hire chaplains in public schools. And so that's Senate Bill 50. And permitting chaplains in public schools, the bill is written where a child could receive religious formation counseling without parent consent. And that's a real concern.
You have about 30 seconds left.
Okay, that's a real concern. And I think people should look at Senate Bill 50 and definitely check that out. The other one that we're hearing is an amendment that was made to Senate Bill 202 that will require the Legislative Council, the Senate, and the Republican majority party to have 2 appointments to the Board of Trustee to every state higher education institution in the state of Indiana. And Senate Bill 14, which will allow more people to carry firearms into the State House. That is another very concerning bill. So with that, I will be excited to take your questions. Again, thanks for having me here.
Thank you very much, Senator Yoder. And I am going to remind everyone before we start taking questions to please put your questions in the chat directed to one question moderator. And we will get started with that. Please be doing that in an ongoing fashion. The first question, I believe, is from Clara Stanley. Clara, I would ask you to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. The question for House Bill 1376, that because the Brown County schools have failed the referendum in 2022, and we are trying to relaunch in this May, and the superintendent and board and PTOs are working really hard. We just heard that the House Bill 1376 will prohibit this kind of a little more flexible and the local authority to decide when we're going to run the referendum. Instead, this House bill will restrict this referendum only to November primary. So if one school district fails referendum, they have to wait 2 years. We can't afford doing it. The Brown County has lost $1.2 million for children per year because we failed the referendum last year. So we can't afford this. Our Brown County is heavily rely on referendum. So we, as group of parents, are sending this opposition email to the House Representative Bill David Paul and Senator.
10 seconds.
Yeah. So can you explain to me what's your knowledge and what's the status of this bill? Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Senator Yoder, can you take that question first, please?
Sure. I am not as familiar yet with Senate Bill 1376, although I'm sure Matt knows a little bit more about that. But we do have a bill that is trying again to make so any referendum money that's gathered has to be shared with all the schools, all the charter schools in any school district. That will be statewide. In the past, that has been sort of carved out for particular districts, but now the bill is going to go, the Senate bill is going to take those dollars and take them statewide. Although I hear your question, it's a little bit different. So I'll stop there and let Matt sort of address the 1376 question.
Yeah, 1376 says if you want to have put a school referendum before the people to raise money for your school, you can only do that in a general election, including a municipal general election. And as pointed out, that does create some problems because we only have general elections every 2 years. And I guess you have a third year municipal general election. I think that it's interesting because I think that people support this kind of bill. I mean, their argument is like, well, more people vote in general elections and so more people will be involved. But I think they just get frustrated that these things are actually passing. But one of the things that's been pointed out, particularly now with gerrymandering and how lopsided districts and things are, the primary elections are becoming more important, of greater interest than the general elections in a lot of ways. And so if you're in a place like, Lake County, they were telling me like their primary is their general election. And, nobody really cares about the general election too much, except for maybe in a presidential year. And so that bill is on third reading, which is the final stage. So it's eligible. Could be called down as early as Monday. And so I think that probably next week that bill will get called down and likely pass, and then it'll be up to the Senate to decide what to do with it.
Thank you very much, both of you. We'll now move on to the next question from Pamela Davidson. Pam, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Good morning. I always comment that the only legislators who show up for this are Democrats. And those of us who are voters, I point that out to my Republican friends. I have a question, Matt, but what you just talked about with schools, isn't it 3 now charter school administrators under indictment for stealing the taxpayer money? I mean, the theft and corruption in that genre is just but 3, I think, right now. Anyway, my question really is for Shelley. I know that there's a new bill proposed, Senate Bill 170, which talks about making threats against election workers felonies. And I know there's a reading for that on Tuesday morning at the State House. My question is, it doesn't prohibit guns in the polling place. We tell people all the time, I'm a worker. You can't wear your candidate t-shirt, leave your umbrella, your water bottle, your backpack here, and we can say nothing to people carrying guns into the polling place. And this comes up in every single training session. So I'm wondering why the big omission. It was introduced by Senator Warner. Could you comment on this legislation?
Absolutely,
Okay.
Pam. So
Yeah.
Senate Bill 17, is that right? I'm sorry.
170, Senate Bill 170.
Okay, I heard something. I thought maybe I spoke out of turn. So Senate Bill 170, yes. And the reason why it's not in there, Pam, is it wouldn't have gotten a hearing. It wouldn't have gotten through the Senate, let alone the House. So your point, we will be offering an amendment on that bill to make sure that that is in there, but it's not in there because this session we are expanding firearms in spaces. The bill that I was speaking to before, the Senate Bill 14, is going to allow more state officials to be able to carry, state electeds to carry in the State House, but now it's expanded to staff, and staff and departments can carry. So that's why Senate Bill 170 doesn't have that language in there, but I know we're working on offering an amendment to include it.
Representative Pierce, would you like to have an opportunity to address that at all?
Well, I don't know about that particular piece of legislation over in the Senate, but it's just, Shelley's correct. Right now, the legislature is dominated by people who believe that the answer to the bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That kind of the NRA slogan is what wins out. And so they truly believe that the more guns you have out there, the more people that are armed, the safer the world will be, because there'll always be plenty of good guys around to save you from the bad guys. And of course, we know that, weapons in the homes and other places lead to suicide, crimes of passion, and there's a lot of negative downside to firearms that don't seem to register with the people who really think the more guns we have, the better off we are.
Thank you, Representative Pierce. Our next individual that has a question is Josh from the Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. Josh, if you would unmute and ask your question, please.
All right. I'm sorry you can't see me on video for some reason. That isn't working. But I just wanted to ask, of course, we know that the reading and education in general is incredibly important for a talented workforce as we go forward. And I know both of you mentioned how that has been a big initiative for both chambers. And I just wanted to see if we had any results, really. I know last session we passed the Science of Reading bill, and kind of if we've even had an opportunity to see where that works, or the results of that is holding students back and reading and all of this is really going to have an impact on our workforce down the line.
Thank you, Josh. The first person to answer this, please, Representative Pierce.
Yeah, I mean, you've pinpointed a problem that I hear from educators a lot is like the legislature is constantly changing laws and requiring new and different things in our classrooms, and they never even wait 10 minutes to see how they work out before they're backpiling on, more stuff. So you're right. We passed legislation in the last session that said teachers have to be using the science of reading approach to teaching reading. And that takes time to retool that, get people, retrain and get the stuff in place. And instead, we're jumping this next thing. I'd also like to point out that, Mitch Daniels during his administration, how many years ago has that been now? Like at least 12? He's the one who said, oh, we got a reading problem with third grade. So, let's hold back more kids and address it. And they passed a bunch of legislation, and apparently it hasn't worked. The other thing is like these people never go back and look at what they've done to see if it actually has any impact. And so what's going on this year now is they're like totally fixated. It's like, we just got to have a zero tolerance, tough on reading kind of policy. What does that mean? We just got to flunk every kid who can't pass the reading test. Now, to some people that might make sense. It's like, well, gee, if they can't read in the third grade, they better stay in the third grade till they can read. But what the educators tell us is that when you hold a kid back, it creates all kinds of stigma. The other kids make fun of them. All kinds of bad things happen. They lose interest in school. And in the long run, you end up oftentimes doing more damage than if you just worked with their reading issue as they're, progressing in other courses. And so this to me is going to be kind of debate is do you just say like, well, ramp up the testing and hold them back if they don't pass? Or do you ask yourself, why are people not being able to read at grade level? And how do you get them the resources to the schools to be able to give the individualized, learning to those kids to get them up to speed? It seems like the legislature gave up on summer school ages ago. There used to be a time when summer school was routine for kids who were not keeping up. And that was the time for them to catch up so they would be with their peers in the fall when people went back to school. And that fell out of favor. So now there's some talk about, okay, we'll have some summer school for kids who have problem reading, but then they never really want to fund it in a meaningful way. So it's a frustrating situation. It's clearly an issue that needs to be addressed because people are correct when they say that reading is the basic foundation of learning and success, and you can't survive, I don't think, in this society unless you can read well. And so it needs to be addressed, but I think they're just going to really fixate on holding kids back and not really at the underlying issues.
Thank you, Representative Pierce. Senator Yoder, would you like to address this?
Thank you, Josh, for your question. And you've really identified one of the concerns of Senate Bill 1. And it has been clear, it keeps coming up, why we need time to train our teachers on the science of reading. Because what we have learned is, how do I say this? No fault of teachers and the students and parents on where we are right now. So who is to blame? I'll just sort of give you a little, one sort of thread that we can trace through all of this was a very powerful vendor who was sort of selling this idea of what works on teaching students to read. And the state of Indiana was pushing this one vendor on, this is how we're going to teach students to read. And our reading proficiency has declined. And the long-term impact on these students and on the state of Indiana is significant. And to your question, on employers, I mean, everyone is hurting, from student to employer, Josh. Everyone is hurting. So why would we say, I mean, excuse me, but oops, we made a mistake. And so to address it, we're actually going to do more harm to these students and hold them back, which we know, what we know by data is retention does not improve proficiency, but retention does harm health outcomes. So why would we move forward with such haste on Senate Bill 1 when we don't have a plan to address, number one, why, and number two, how are we going to address the impact of this retention on either employers to the impact that it's going to have on young people? I think it's definitely sort of, to say it's putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. Let's see what we can do with the work that we did last session on the science of reading. Let's retrain, retool, and see the impact it's going to have on our students. I will say Senate Bill 1 does address the summer school aspect, but it's not providing additional dollars. But it does have some language in there about requiring. No, it doesn't require. It's just encouraging and trying to provide more resources for students with summer school, but it's not going to mandate. The only mandate is going to be holding students back. So I think there's a disconnect there, but Senate Bill 1 does have some language in there addressing summer school. So those are my concerns about Senate Bill 1 that remain, and I appreciate your question, Josh.
Senator Yoder, can you tell us who the vendor
I don't know
was?
the name of the vendor. It was brought up, and we were encouraged, that's a better word, encouraged to watch this podcast called Sold a Story. And so I've been listening to that, and I don't know. I think what's really angered me is we've failed our students, families, teachers. I mean, all, in a 20-year span, we need to course correct. But taking it out on third graders is not the right step forward.
Thank you. I actually am going to assert my moderator prerogative here because I have a question, and I'm not sure if you can answer it or not. You can pass if you want to, but how much of this do you think might be solved if we had mandatory pre-K and lowering that requirement of going to school earlier than age 7?
Yeah, I'll jump
Yeah.
in on that because the House Democratic Caucus has been raising this issue, is that if we had a good system of quality, affordable pre-K, and if we had a lower, mandatory time to begin school, I think it's age 7 now, the kids would be getting an earlier start, because we know if you read the kids early, a lot of it has to do with what's going on in their home, right? And so if you have parents who are working 2 or 3 jobs, and they don't have, the time to really do the things you would hope a parent would do, or in some cases, maybe they're just not aware of the importance of something, or maybe in a few instances, they just don't care. But whatever the reason, the household that the kids come from is going to determine how ready they are when they show up as a 7-year-old to start school. And obviously, people who have the ability to get into, quality early childhood education programs, they have a good start too. And so I think this is one of my biggest frustrations with the people driving education policy for the last, since at least 2011, is they don't want to acknowledge the role that socioeconomic level plays in people's preparedness for school and their ability to succeed in school. They have this basic idea, and this was articulated by Mitch Daniels when he was governor, is like, hey, it doesn't matter what's happening to that kid outside of school, as long as you have a highly qualified teacher at the front of the classroom. When they close that door, that kid will learn. And you know what? That's just BS. But that's the way that they operate. And if anybody, I've spent some time in classrooms, and it's amazing to me what teachers, teaching third grade, it's just amazing. Kids coming in late, looking grumpy, and the teachers say, "Oh, well, the problem is that, you know, that kid's mom has to work like the overnight shift, and it's his job to get his sister up, but he can never get her up, so he's always late. Then he gets punished for being late, so now he's mad at his sister, and he's like mad at life. And he comes in here, and I've got to get that kid refocused on learning, right? And then you have other kids' emotional problems. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of outside things going on that impact what happens in that classroom. And we expect our teachers to teach through all that and, you know, kind of ignore it and power through. And it's just not rational. And so the legislature needs to really listen to educators, which is my ultimate frustration, is since about 2011, educators are not listened to. They're almost like they're the enemy or something. And they're the people who actually have the education about how you educate kids. They're the ones actually in the classrooms. They should be treated like professionals and be intimately involved in deciding what is the best system of education in our state, but they're not. It's like the politicians are running it all and they don't know what they're doing.
Thank you very much, Matt. Shelley, did you want to speak to my question at all?
Yes, I would like to just say that it was my concern with our discussion for the science of reading. I actually, my issue with the science of reading was why can't a teacher have all the options to figure out how best to help a student learn? Why are we mandating one way or another? Since, I mean, I think what we can probably all agree on is I bet each one of us on this call learn better in different ways versus because of our experience, because of our brain works. I mean, who knows? So why are we mandating one way over another? What we did last year was actually say it has to be science of reading. They even wanted to take out every other option. Like it had to be that or nothing. The thing is, how we have been teaching reading has worked for some students. It hasn't been every student. So why don't we just sort of provide, you know, the politicians, why don't we just sort of take a step backwards and let teachers actually have the flexibility to respond to how best a student learns and be able to provide that the nimble approach that teaching is, the art that teaching is, and let a teacher actually demonstrate that and do that in the classroom. That is what I want to say about how we teach. I mean, teaching is an art, and I think we're right back where we are. And let's just we keep saying there's no silver bullet. Well, then Senate Bill 1 is sort of saying our silver bullet is going to be let's address proficiency in reading by retaining our students in the 3rd grade. That's the silver bullet here in Senate Bill 1. So we can't say there's no silver bullet because what we're saying is we're going to keep students back and that's going to help them read. That's not going to help students read. We know that because of what education research is showing us. So I just, yes, we need to see what the science of reading can do, but the science of reading alone isn't going to solve this issue. It's what Matt said. It is lifting up. So I will say, yes, getting our students into school earlier would be helpful at age 5. Early childhood education, universal pre-K would be one way that we can address this, but we just need more options for kids and for families. And we need to leave the teaching to the teachers.
Thank you very much, Senator Yoder. And we, at this point in time, we have one more person on the list to ask a question. So those of you out there participating, please think of some questions for these legislators who have so graciously offered this hour and a half of their time to answer your questions. The next person on the list is Carrie Miksha. Carrie, if you can unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. First off, Matt and Shelley, you're doing amazing work at the State House. It feels, just watching you, it feels exhausting emotionally and mentally. This is, as always, a tough session. It's always, and especially if you're not part of the majority, it's heartbreaking. One thing I wish would exist was a bill that said you're no longer allowed to pass unfunded or underfunded mandates, because every year it feels like, especially in education, there are mandates passed that have no money behind them. Removing, also outlawing education, the Christmas tree bills, like Education Matters bills, any kind of matters bills that are longer than, I don't know, 100 words would be nice. Because reading those, your eyes glaze over. You're like, okay, where's the, like, there's a lot of good, but there's got to be something sneaky in here. And I'm coming from the, as a public school advocate, that's why I call it sneaky, because there's always something that's going towards supporting privatization of education. In SB 1, it would be nice if they come out and say, like Linda Rogers, like, oh, it's last resort. Retention, we want it to be a last resort. Then why did they strike the last resort line in the bill? If there was an amendment that would put that back in, just that language, last resort, that would be
You have 10 seconds.
nice. But here's my question. ESAs. I know SB 255 is dead, but Boehning put in a path in one of his bills, expanding ESAs to siblings. Are the other ESAs bills going to be heard that make it universal?
Thank you very much, Carrie. And this question will go first to Senator Yoder.
Thank you, Carrie. I don't actually, this is my take. I don't actually think we're going to hear many of the ESA, because not that's good news, but we heard a whole new vision. It was here only in appropriations, a new vision for the ESA accounts. And we heard it as here only. It's a Senator Mishler bill, because he wants to prepare everybody on what's going to happen next year as a possibility. But getting rid of the ESA accounts and just expanding it to, I don't know how, I'm trying to figure out. I can liken it to, instead of giving a lump sum to a school, parents will be given a lump sum to spend that money however. So it wouldn't go to a school, but it would be like an a la carte.
Yeah, cafeteria staff.
Going through, like, I could spend a portion of it because I want my child to take math at this school. I want them to take language arts from this school. I want them to take foreign language from this school. And I want them to take an instrument lesson from this teacher. And the money would go around to each of these individuals, and they would then just hop around and use the money, instead of if the money goes to one institution or body. So that's, I think, why I don't know if we'll hear very many ESA bills, because I think the idea is, wow, families aren't taking advantage of these. So it must be because of how it's set up. So let's rethink that. Not, it's really interesting because more Hoosier families actually love their public schools. So maybe we need to think, we need to rethink the approach. Actually, we're going to change ESAs altogether. But I have heard removing the income eligibility. I have heard expanding it. Those are still out there, but I'm wondering if they're going to sort of pump the brakes on ESAs overall this session so that they can do an overhaul next session.
Thank you, Senator Yoder. Representative Pierce.
Yeah, I mean, it's just no doubt that in the long term, they've been doing everything very incremental to privatize the education system as much as possible. And then they had that huge leap forward where they just basically made it a universal program in the last budget. So I don't know how much more incrementally they have to do since they're already at universal on the vouchers anyway. So, I mean, there's just no doubt that that's the inclination. Now, when exactly they do it, I don't know. The interesting thing is Representative Baining, the chair of the Education Committee in the House, he had a House Bill 1380, which is not just education matters, but various education matters. And the good news there is that on second reading, he stripped out a lot of stuff that was controversial out of there. So I think somebody might have said to him, you know, this is supposed to be the non-controversial, don't spend money, you know, just like get out of here and go campaign in the primaries kind of thing. And so that I thought that was kind of interesting that, you know, the education committee members are telling us that he was really stripping out a lot of the stuff they didn't like from that bill. And as a matter of fact, it passed with like 91 votes. I think he stripped it down so much that it wasn't offensive to most people anymore.
Thank you very much, Representative Pierce. The next individual that has a question is Mary Coy. Mary, if you would unmute and ask your question.
This question is for Senator Yoder, and it goes back to your discussion about repeal of total ban on abortion. I think you answered my question in chat. That is it. SB 208?
Yes.
Okay. And my question to you was, should we contact both senators and reps? And I had that question before I knew the Senate bill number. What is your advice to us? To contact everybody and say, hey, support this repeal?
Yes. And I recognize that we've run out of time. I recognize that this is going to be an email or a letter of more activism than sort of something rooted in reality, only because we don't have time. But they need to know that this is still on the minds and hearts of Hoosiers, and what we have put forth in terms of getting politicians interfering with access to healthcare is the wrong direction. And use some of those examples. You know, we have access to care issues in rural communities. We have students who are choosing other states on where they're going to get their medical education. The impact, the increase in Medicaid expenditures in the state of Indiana, all of this is going to be impacted if we would just hear and repeal, if we would hear 208 and repeal Senate Bill 1 from that summer session. So that's what I would ask, is that don't give up. We have to let them know we aren't giving up. And so that would be why I would say, yes, reach out to your senators and representatives, asking them to hear Senate Bill 208.
Thank you,
Thank
Senator.
you very much.
Thank you, Senator Yoder. Representative Pierce, would you like to address that question?
Yes, I mean, the hard truth is the Republican Party is wedded to an abortion ban. That's just the way it is. Now, this is going to sound really political, and I apologize for it, but the only thing that's going to change this mindset are election returns, election results. So we have an attorney general who's made a cottage industry out of attacking reproductive health care providers. He's up for election this year. If he were to lose and people would say, wow, there are even Republicans voting against a person, I guess they must like reproductive, health care rights. They must like reproductive freedom. We've got a governor on the, governor's race coming up. The governor is going to sign or veto bills that come to the desk. So people should be interested in that race. We have a U.S. Senate seat that's open. And I bet you probably have a pretty clear difference in the two candidates we'll end up having in the fall about what they think about this issue, and particularly whether there should be a national abortion ban. So I think that the point at this point in time, I think it's time to focus in on democracy and the elections, and people who care about these issues just have to really get out and get involved like they never have been before, because you can be sure that people on the other side who think the legislature has done a great job on the issue, you can be sure they're going to be out and they're going to be working for their candidates. And so, you know, this ties into another issue, which there's been a lot of discussion. I just had this report out. We are 50 out of 51 for turnout in America, because District of Columbia is in the mix. So we got 50 states plus DC. Only West Virginia has lower turnout than us, right? So, you know, half our population, voting age population, has checked out from the whole electoral process. They've given up on democracy. And so what we've got to do is go out and talk to people who have disengaged and get them re-engaged, and get them to understand that these decisions that are made at elections have direct impacts on their lives and are really important. And I think that's ultimately, for people who want change, I think that's how change is going to come, is we just got to do hard work at election time.
Thank you, Representative Pierce. And so I guess what both of you are saying is, not only should we take an active role in trying to get Senate Bill 208 heard, but we need to be keeping our eyes on all of the candidates and what we want to see happen with the ban on abortion, not just this one bill during this one session. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to encourage everyone again. I only have one person left on my list for a question. So if any of you are trying to make sure and get a question asked, please indicate that in the chat. The next person I'm going to call on is Kathy Roundtree. Kathy, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Hi, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Senator Yoder and Representative Pierce, for showing up today. You just partially answered my question in your last comments, but given that our you are the only two of our representatives who show up at these forums, what would you recommend for the voters? How can we best support the bills that we support? How can we support you? And what is the best way to make our voices heard? Letters to the editor, direct contact with our representatives. What would you suggest to us as the most effective ways? Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And this question will go first to Representative Pierce.
Yeah, I think that the important thing to know is, at the end of the day, legislators care most about what their own constituents think. And so, you know, a legislator who doesn't represent Bloomington getting 100 emails from Bloomington, I'm not certain that sways them that much, quite honestly. But if they start to hear from their own people about a bill, and so I think that the hard work that needs to get done, which is a little easier with social media and things, is if you have friends and family members that live in other districts. So if you have people who don't live in our districts that, you know, live around the area, see if you can get them to, you know, be engaged in that issue and contact their own legislator, maybe the legislators who aren't here today, that represent them. And when members begin to hear from their own people, I think that's when they begin to maybe second guess what their vote should be. I mean, it's difficult with the gerrymandering because everything is, you know, very lopsided in most of these districts. Now, the one interesting exception is, and I think it's kind of a fluke, but, you know, the District 62 right next to mine, which is kind of a horseshoe around the city of Bloomington and goes over to Brown County and into a little bit of Jackson County. That's like 50-50 district. That's razor thin. So that's like a total exception. So we've got a district that's always going to be competitive, always going to be always going to be in the mix, you know, right here in our backyard. Many of you may even actually live in that district. But a lot of the other districts, they're like 70-30. So, you know, we've got to start getting the people who are disengaged from the process involved in contacting their legislators, because hearing from people who live in their districts is the thing that's really going to start changing votes.
Thank you, Representative Pierce. Senator Yoder.
I don't know how much more I have to add. Representative Pierce did a great job of covering the bases. I would say get involved, helping get out that vote. I mean, it can seem overwhelming when you think about all the voters, but if you start breaking it down, just where do you live? What's that precinct number? And just do some education in that precinct. If that precinct chair or vice chair position is open, get involved, do some education in that precinct, do some activities. I mean, it hasn't changed that much in how we can most effectively impact turnout. And it's just re-engaging people and getting engaged yourself. I mean, here we have, this Zoom with so many engaged folks. Think of if we could just include a couple more people who we know, it would expand the call even more, including one more county, partnering with Johnson County League of Women Voters. I mean, that expanded the reach of representatives and senators just by that one county. So I think let's continue trying to encourage the representatives and senators who could be on this call to participate. And I think that, that's a bipartisan issue. And I would say could get everybody excited to say, I could hop on from my house and just listen to my elected officials talking about what's happening at the State House. I think that would be a real win and move the needle when it comes to voter engagement.
I would highly agree with that last statement. Any of you who have a representative or a senator that's not here today, reaching out to them and just saying, why weren't you there? So that I could ask you personally some of these questions. Hopefully at some point in time that will get to a level that they will actually start participating again. Okay, I think the next individual in the queue is Penny Githens. Penny, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. And thank you, as everyone else has said, to Senator Yoder and Representative Pierce for being out here today. I routinely get what I consider to be very, very political emails from the Attorney General, Todd Rokita, and from the Secretary of State, Diego Morales. Is there any kind of ethics committee within the state legislature who has any power to get this kind of nonsense stopped?
Well, I guess, I think it might be, is it my turn or Shelley's turn?
It's actually Shelley's turn
Okay.
this time. Shelley, would you like to address that first, please?
Well, definitely forward them to me. I know that there are steps. I think the Inspector General is the person who we could forward these to. And I can also take them to, we have an ethics committee. I'm not serving on it this session, but I would say we could at least have a conversation and request an inquiry. So if you could forward those to me, that would be helpful. You have my email, but I will put it in the chat for everybody else.
Well, but this will just flood your email. I got to tell you, there are just so many of them, several every week. But thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Penny. And Matt, would you like to address it now?
Yeah, so, the legislature obviously gets to pass the laws and appropriate the money and kind of tell these offices what they can do, but they're in a separate branch of government. So there's a whole separate ethics code that deals with administrative or executive branch employees. And then the Attorney General and the Secretary of State are independently elected. And so they're not quite in the governor's thing. And so I think the Inspector General is probably the first place to stop. This is a position created 15 years or so ago that's supposed to look into any wrongdoing among state officials out there. And there is this state ethics code, and you're not supposed to do political campaigning on state time and things like that. Whether there's something that directly addresses what can go in their newsletter, I'm not sure. At least in the House, I don't know how it works in the Senate, but in the House, there's like this little screening committee, which I think actually is an intern in the basement someplace. But I often, when I write my newsletters, I often comes back like, you can't say that. You're not allowed to say that. And I have to like play all these games just to try to be able to put something in a newsletter that I think is accurately describing what's happening. And so the legislature's got its own kind of mail rules that don't apply to those other offices. So I would say the Inspector General and looking at the ethics code for the executive branch would be the place to start.
Thank you very much, Representative Pierce. The next person in the queue is George Hegeman. And George, if you would unmute and ask your question.
I'd like to join everyone who is thanking Shelley and Matt for showing up today and for being so responsive. As a registered Republican, I'm ashamed of my party's colleagues who so regularly fail to show up and address important issues. My question, and I think it's one probably that's been already answered by Matt, is how do you address the questions raised by blatantly special interest groups? For instance, the pharmaceutical manufacturers who come in with their attempts to get the PFASs, the polyfluoroalkyl substances that are not soluble, made legal in the state of Indiana, despite what the FDA, the National Academy of Sciences, and just about anybody else who knows about the chemistry says should not happen. I mean, this is blatant legislative anti-science as far as I can see. Apart from your very good advice to show up at the polls in November, how else do you deal with this kind of thing? Is there any set of handles or teeth that we can be applied in this particular case?
George, thank you so much for that question. And it will go first to Matt Pierce.
Yeah, there are a lot of industries that have disproportionate influence over the legislature because they're participating in the political process, mostly with their money. And a lot of times it's dark money. So they give to a 501c4 and they kind of launder it out and then it comes through and you're never quite sure where the money's coming from, but you have your suspicions. So that is definitely a problem. I think the biggest thing is just education and engagement. I guess I kind of said this already, but I was thinking more in the election context, which is super important. But even with the legislatures in session, I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that the media has kind of imploded and is in transition, and it's like not easy. People don't read newspapers like they used to. Broadcast news ratings are going down, so people are not as informed, I don't think. And so, for example, on the PFAS thing, one of our members had an amendment said, like, okay, if you think that PFAS absolutely has to be used in medical devices that save lives, okay, maybe I'll give you that for now. So let's just have a very narrow bill that says it's okay in, medical devices when there's no other, alternative available. And that was rejected. And so on third reading, someone on our side stood up and said, look, you're talking about medical devices, but you're ignoring the fact that you're basically allowing PFAS, the forever chemical, cancer-causing agent, no way to get it out of the environment. You're allowing this like in the kids' toys, their sleepers, the mats they lay on, all this kind of stuff. It's like, do you really want to do that? And I think that if the parents out there and other people understood what that bill is doing, I think there'd be like a small revolution. And I think it's just that people are not tuned in and just get confused by it, the whole way the place works. And so I think anything we can do, working with state organizations that care about these issues to get people educated and engaged, I think that's when you'll begin to get pushback from people asking, like, why do you want to do that?
Thank you so much, Matt. Senator Yoder, would you like to address that question?
George, thank you so much for being here, for your question. Education is so important. And I want to just say a little story. And this is I mean, we are fortunate to have these, an incredible sort of life bioscience presence in the state of Indiana. And my story is about medical device companies. So it's just a coincidence. Let's just say that. But I have been meeting with them to ask them about why they have not, how can we work together to repeal that tax on menstrual discharge devices? Because those are FDA, those are labeled medical devices. And the medical device companies worked tirelessly against the Affordable Care Act to make sure that that medical devices, the tax to pay for the Affordable Care Act was repealed and taken out of the Affordable Care Act. So the medical devices would remain not taxed. And I was curious as to why their advocacy stopped there and didn't continue on for other medical devices. And that conversation that I've had now with multiple medical device company, government affairs individuals at the State House, it was this, we never thought about it. So I'm wondering, this role of education, of partnering with people who are advocating for something, if we could help educate them, because we know that once people understand, parents, but also medical device companies are grandparents, they are parents, they are people who are living in this environment in our world. They should care about these things too, and not be so focused on just getting a win for a win's sake. That kind of education helps. It might not seem like it's as fast as what we need or what we want, but educating one another is key. And I'm just going to come back to forums like this. They are key. So keep pressing. We're going to, not stop in the education of this bill, but your question is a really is an important one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Yoder. I think that at this point in time, we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to move on to your closing remarks. And the last question will be from Claire Neisanger. Claire, if you could unmute and ask your question. Claire, are you still on the Zoom call?
My question is, how are we going to be able to handle the education of medical students in this state if they are not allowed to learn total health care for women?
Hey, thank you for that question. Senator Yoder, you're first to respond.
Well, I appreciate that question, Claire. I think it's an important one. And I think you're pointing to that while where we are with a near total ban on abortion access, abortion care in Indiana, it could still get worse. We should not fool ourselves that other bills to actually continue taking away freedoms and liberties and opportunities from Hoosiers and from people who want to call Indiana home, those are still happening, and it could get worse. What you're pointing to is it could be, I know that there is a discussion to ban the ability to teach the full spectrum of healthcare, specifically reproductive healthcare, to medical students. I could be wrong, but I don't think at this point it has been banned. But I know there's a conversation to ban it. I know we haven't heard any of those bills this session on the Senate side, but I'm not sure about the House side. So at this point, I think what you're pointing to is things can get worse. So we need to just fight and stand up and speak out and educate every step along the way and not give up on this issue. It is a bipartisan issue. And we can't forget that. Senate Bill 208 points to that, 208 points to that it's a bipartisan issue. So Matt, where are we with banning being able to teach abortion care services or the full spectrum of reproductive health care in schools?
Yeah, I think the Republicans know that this issue is not good for them. You know, they've done their duty for their base and they passed that bill in that special session. And I think for the moment, they don't want to do anything to put the focus back on that. So I think it's unlikely we'll see anything in this short session, but there is no doubt that you have a segment of the legislature that wants complete total ban. And they're being driven by their supporters. And these primaries coming up, there are people challenging Republican incumbents because they're not right-wing enough. They're not pure enough on abortion. And so, you know, the question is, who are we going to see show up at the state house after the next election? I mean, just to give you an idea, in the courts and criminal code, where, you know, we deal with like who goes to jail and why, and a lot of times we're talking about drug crimes and drugs and how to try to reduce addictions and that kind of thing. And so we had, I think it was a generic bill that every year we have to list all the new illegal drugs because the Chinese and other people are creating the precursors. They're coming up with new molecules, synthetic drugs that do the same thing as like what we might think of as heroin or something. So we're constantly in this cat and mouse game of adding these new molecules to the list. Well, we had testimony on that bill, and a person showed up and said, well, you've got another drug that you need to put on your list of illegal drugs. And he pulled out an envelope and says, this Plan B, anybody can get it in the mail. And it's horrible. Women are killing their babies. And went off in a whole kind of anti-choice diatribe in the middle of a courts and criminal code meeting. Something that had nothing to do with that issue. And then another person was like handing out flyers to us on the way out the door. So those people are chomping at the bit to purge from the Republican Party anybody who's not pure enough on those issues. And I think that's one reason why the Republicans want to get out of town as quickly as possible, is they don't want to have every day, how come you haven't passed our bill yet? You know, and so, and then they got to get back and defend themselves. So I think we're safe for this session, but I think there is no doubt that particularly if they have another, you know, routine election where they got the super majorities again, that's when I think the floodgates will open, and they won't be able, you know, the same people that got the Kinsey Institute defunded from state appropriations, they're going to be right there pushing on all these other issues, and it's not going to be pretty.
Senator Yoder, would you like to address that? I'm sorry, both of you have addressed that one. I apologize. We're now going to move into the closing statements, and you'll each have about 3 minutes to close for today. And Representative Pierce, I think you get to go first.
Okay, well, as I said, you know, next week, basically Monday, for the next 7 days from Monday through Monday, is kind of like the final shot at House bills. Then there'll be a little bit of a halftime, and then each House will be working on the other House's bill. Although the Senate, for some reason, is always a day or two behind the House. I've never quite figured that out. But and so we're getting to the point where we're going to know at least what's introduced in the original houses, what's moving and what's not. One issue I thought I would just mention, which is an example of the kinds of issues the legislature often handles that are way under the radar and hard for the average person to even understand what's happening. And that's House Bill 1003 is fundamentally changing the way that you appeal decisions of administrative agencies that find you have violated their regulations. And this would include IDEM. So 1003, which has passed the House and is going to be over in the Senate, it essentially says that if an administrative law judge rules in favor of say the person who is accused of polluting, and the IDEM were to appeal that into the court system, if they lose there, they have to pay all the fees of the person accused of polluting. So you're going to have this built-in disincentive to actually go up. But more importantly, it changes something that's been fundamental in the law for a long time called deference to the expert agencies. And so this bill says that if you don't like what IDEM did and you appeal it into the courts, the judge sitting there has what they call de novo review. That means he gets to start from scratch. He or she, whoever the judge is, gets to start from scratch and essentially become a policymaker. They get to decide what the statute means. They get to decide whether the chemical fits the statute or whatever. And they don't have to pay any attention at all to the experts at the agency that supposedly understands all the intricacies and the science of what's going on there. And that's the kind of thing that, you have to be kind of a geeky lawyer to really understand the impact of that. And that's paralleling a similar thing that's going on the federal level, where there's this thing called the Chevron doctrine, which was passed in the 80s, saying that federal judges should respect the expertise of federal agencies and not just substitute their own opinions for what the agency did. Well, there's a case that's already been heard in oral argument at the US Supreme Court that would eliminate the Chevron, basically overturn the precedent of the Chevron doctrine. And so we'll see how that works out. But we may have both at the federal and state level a situation where the expert agencies and their understanding of the science of what they're regulating goes out the window for whatever a judge might think about the issue personally.
Thank you very much, Matt. Senator Yoder, would you like to give your closing remarks?
Yes, thank you for being here. Thanks for organizing this event. And just a couple of reminders on 2 additional bills that will be heading over to the House that we need advocacy and education on. One is Senate Bill 234 that will take away the state of emergency powers from the governor after 30 days. And it would require that a special session be called, and that, a natural disaster, it just says we're going to politicize every natural disaster in the state of Indiana and remove some of those executive powers from the governor and places them in the legislative bodies. So that is a bill I think we should be definitely keeping an eye on. That's Senate Bill 234 that has, I think, passed out of the Senate. I think we had this week, third reading went through, and it should be on its way to the House. So definitely start making some noise about that one. And the other one that is very concerning is Senate Bill 52. Senate Bill 52 is a bill that will put a moratorium on any community's ability to address rapid transit in their communities, having dedicated lines for rapid transit. And it was filed to address what Indianapolis has already done for the last, I think, when they passed their referendum by over 60% to have rapid transit in Indianapolis. And the voters said, yes, we do. That was 2016. Now in 2024, they are going to put a moratorium. So all of those federal dollars, it's a multi-million-dollar program that already has been happening in Indianapolis, and it would basically kill all of the projects that have not yet completed. But it impacts Bloomington because we have a rapid transit that we're trying to address with our Bloomington Transit, and it impacts us because it would be statewide. So that's Senate Bill 52, and we should be making some serious noise about that, and it's heading over to the House when we switch our bills.
Thank you so much, Senator Yoder. First of all, I want to thank both of our representatives here for participating with us, not only in this forum, but so regularly, and always making yourselves available to answer the questions we have and pointing out to us how important it is for all of us to be involved. I want to remind everyone that's still on the Zoom that you can find bills on the Indiana General Assembly website. Make sure to stay active with your senators and representatives to let them know what bills you care about, and encourage others to do the same thing. Our next legislative update will be February the 17th at 9:30 a.m. We hope that all of you will join us again and encourage others to do so as well. And also reach out to your legislators and encourage them to participate not only in the February 17th update, but also the March 2nd update that will be coming up. I want to thank the legislators again. As I said, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank CATS, Community Access Television Services, for recording this session and making it available to anyone who was not able to be present today. Also, our team members from the Leagues of Women Voters that served as sponsors, and the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce, and the individuals representing those organizations that helped us organize and bring this to you today. You always, you never cease to educate and enlighten us and encourage us with your persistence in trying to represent your constituents. So thank you, Matt and Shelley, for all you do for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now, yes, close the meeting.